everyone, and welcome to And Gluten Free, a channel dedicated to people such as myself that can't handle wheat-based products. I became gluten-free about a year ago, and when I purchased my first gluten-free bread, I really wasn't impressed. I began to think that gluten-free meant hard bread and pizza crust with weird textures or weird aftertastes. So that's when I decided to set out in search of recipes that honestly changed my life. One of the things I really began to miss was pizza, and at this point I've tried so many different crusts, and let me tell you, nothing compares to this crust. I actually got this recipe off another YouTube channel called Gluten Free Habit, where she used this recipe for soft dinner rolls, which blew my mind. That's when I started doing some testing to see if I could make the perfect pizza crust that was crispy on the bottom and doughy on the top. Well guys, here's the recipe. Enjoy. So what's cool about this recipe is it is very versatile. This is not only gluten-free, but it can also be vegetarian. This recipe is actually quite easy. I think the only difficult portion of this is the special tools. I find that when you're cooking gluten-free, it's very important to use a kitchen scale. It really is important that we have exact amounts. Don't get me wrong, I did supply you the cup amounts as well, but this is not going to be as exact as if you were measuring it. Also, you're gonna need some strong beaters. This is gonna save you a lot of time and allow you to mix the dough so that it all incorporates properly. So, step 1, we gotta get our yeast mixture ready. Into 3/4 a cup of warm water, we're gonna be adding 2 teaspoons of dry active pizza yeast. At this point, we're also going to add our 3 tablespoons of sugar. The sugar is simply just a food source for the yeast. Thoroughly mix the yeast and sugar into the water and then set it aside so that the yeast can bloom. Next, we're going to start measuring out all of our dry ingredients. In a large bowl, we're going to combine our tapioca starch, our corn starch, and our brown rice flour to the mix. One thing you'll notice is that I'm going to be measuring everything into the same bowl. The reason why I do this is because simply, I've just made this recipe so many times. The first time I made this recipe, I measured everything separately. Don't be afraid to measure everything separately if you feel more comfortable doing so. Lastly, we're going to add our baking powder, our xanthan gum, and salt. Now at this stage, I like to grab a utensil and mix all of the dry ingredients together so that they're all well incorporated and they get to know each other a bit. Time to move on to our wet ingredients. Crack 2 large eggs into a separate bowl. Then combine your butter and vinegar. At this point, we need our beaters because we're going to whip this up until it's nice and foamy and combined. Basically, we're trying to add some extra air into the mix. This will help with the pizza crust and creating that nice fluffy texture we're looking for. At this point, we're going to combine that into our dry ingredients. I like to then take a spatula and fold that in briefly before I add in my yeast mixture. When we're looking at the yeast mixture, what we're looking for is some nice foam at the top. This shows us that the yeast is very much alive and ready to do its thing. Take the yeast mixture and dump that into the dry ingredients as well. Once again, take a spatula and quickly fold that in, not until it's fully mixed, but just incorporated enough so that the flour, when you turn on the beaters, doesn't go everywhere. And like I just mentioned, at this point, we're gonna grab our beaters and mix this thoroughly. Don't be afraid of overmixing this batter. I find that the more you mix it, the more of a smoother consistency you get. What we're looking for is a nice elastic dough. It kind of mimics gluten in a way, which is quite funny considering that there is no gluten in this recipe. Don't be afraid to beat this mixture for as long as needed. I find that mixing this on high between 5 and 7 minutes gives the best results. During the mixing process, I like to scrape the sides down at least once and continue beating for a little while longer. Once I'm happy with the consistency of the dough, I will then take my spatula and scrape down the sides one more time before placing a piece of tin foil over the top so that I can go and have this sit in a warm space so that the yeast can do its job. We're looking for the dough to double in size, and this will take about an hour. If your yeast ends up not blooming properly without that foam at the top, then sadly, it probably means that your yeast is dead. This means that at this stage, your dough won't double in size. The first time I ever made this recipe, I didn't know anything about yeast, and my yeast didn't bloom properly. It wasn't until after I did some research I realized that my yeast was probably dead and had to restart. Now don't be alarmed, this dough is a little bit sticky, but I'm actually going to show you what I do to roll out my pizza crust. Firstly, we're going to spoon out the dough onto our baking sheet covered in tin foil. Then apply some cornstarch to your hands and to the dough. This will help with the stickiness and allow you to press the pizza in the shape that you want. This recipe actually makes 2 medium-sized pizzas. So once I'm done completing my crust, I then turn to the other half of the pizza dough, which I'm going to show you how to store. In a Ziploc bag, I simply spoon the mixture into the bag, fold it up and seal it and pop it in the fridge. I find that this dough lasts very well in the fridge for up to 3 days. But realistically, I've never gone longer than that because in my house, this pizza crust does not last very long. Now it's time to add our toppings. What's great about this recipe is you actually don't have to pre-cook the crust before adding your toppings. So this is the stage to really go nuts. Add all your cheese, your meat, whatever you like. It's all versatile and it's catered to you. And if you're a vegetarian, just skip the meat and add as many veggies as you want. Once done, we're going to be placing this into a 400-degree Fahrenheit oven for 25 to 30 minutes. Make sure that you place your pizza on the bottom rack of your oven. This will ensure that you get that crispy bottom that you're looking for while the top stays nice and doughy. And voila, the pizza is done. Let's just take a moment and listen and appreciate the crispiness of the bottom of this crust. This crust is so good that my fiance, who might I add can eat gluten, actually finds that this is the closest thing he's had since I've gone gluten-free to real crust. This crust actually gives that structural integrity that you want, along with that crispy and soft pizza texture. It honestly is the perfect gluten-free crust, and realistically, it was quite easy to make. Anyways guys, I really hope you enjoyed this recipe. Please don't forget to subscribe and thumbs up this video because I'm going to be making videos weekly going forward. If you have any suggestions for recipes you'd love me to test out or try and create, please don't be afraid to comment that down below. And thanks again for tuning in, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!